In a small village nestled deep in the African savannah, life was simple and peaceful. The people of the village shared their harvest, raised animals, and lived in harmony with the land. They believed their lives were blessed by the gods, who watched over them and protected their fields and families. Whenever someone was in need, the villagers were always willing to help, for they believed that by helping one another, they were honoring the gods. Among the villagers, there was a poor beggar named Kofi. Kofi was a quiet man, always keeping to himself. He lived on the outskirts of the village in a small hut made of sticks and mud. Every day, Kofi would go into the village, asking for help. The people were generous, offering him clothes, blankets, and anything else he needed, except food. Strangely, Kofi never asked for food, and the villagers assumed he found his own way of feeding himself. But as time went on, something strange began to happen in the village. Once every 6 months, a child would go missing. The villagers were shocked and heartbroken, searching high and low, but no trace of the children was ever found. They believed that perhaps a wild animal or an evil spirit had taken them. They turned to their elders and the village priest for guidance, hoping the gods would intervene. As the months passed, the disappearances became more frequent. First, a child would go missing every 3 months, and then every month. Fear gripped the village. People began to believe that the land was cursed by the gods, and they worried that they had done something to anger their ancestors. They decided to offer sacrifices to appease the gods. At first, they sacrificed small animals, goats and chickens, but when nothing changed, they offered cows and other valuable things like gold and fine cloth. They held ceremonies with music and prayer, hoping to lift the curse, but still, the children kept disappearing. The people became desperate, but no matter how many sacrifices they made, the curse seemed to grow stronger. There was one person in the village who did not believe in the gods or their power, a young woman named Abina. Abina was an outcast, shunned by most of the villagers because she refused to follow the village traditions. She was outspoken, often questioning the priests and elders, and she did not participate in the ceremonies or sacrifices. Many believed her lack of belief brought misfortune upon the village, and she was treated with suspicion. But Abina did not care about what the others thought. She had always been independent, and when she saw that the sacrifices were doing nothing to stop the disappearances, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She was determined to find the true cause of the curse. One evening, as she sat by the village fire, Abina noticed something strange about Kofi, the beggar. She had always found him odd, but that night, she noticed how he slipped away from the village quietly, as though trying not to be seen. Curiosity piqued, Abina decided to follow him. Kofi made his way to the edge of the village, heading toward his small hut. Abina kept her distance, moving silently through the trees, watching his every move. When Kofi reached his hut, he paused and looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then, to Abina's horror, he slipped inside and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. It was a small body, a child. Abina's heart pounded as she watched in shock. Kofi carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing one of the missing children. The child was still alive but weak and barely moving. Kofi, with a twisted grin on his face, carried the child deeper into the forest. Abina followed, hiding in the shadows. As they reached a secluded clearing, Kofi began to prepare a fire. Abina's blood ran cold when she realized what was happening. Kofi was not just a beggar, he was the one taking the children. He was killing them, and worse still, he was eating them. Unable to stay silent any longer, Abina stepped out from her hiding place and shouted, "Stop, Kofi. I know what you're doing." Kofi turned, startled to see Abina standing there, her eyes blazing with anger. For a moment, he said nothing, but then his face twisted into a sneer. "You should have stayed in the village, foolish girl. Now you know the truth, and you won't live to tell it." But Abina was not afraid. She had always been brave, and she knew she had to act quickly. Without hesitation, she ran back to the village, shouting for help. The villagers gathered around as she told them everything she had seen. At first, they were reluctant to believe her. After all, Kofi was just a beggar. But when they saw the fear in Abina's eyes, they knew she was telling the truth. The men of the village armed themselves with spears and clubs, and they followed Abina to the clearing. When they arrived, they found Kofi preparing to carry out his gruesome deed. Enraged, the villagers seized him, dragging him back to the village. Kofi was thrown to the ground before the village elders. He confessed to his terrible crimes, admitting that he had been the one taking the children. He had been hiding his hunger for human flesh for years, and the children were his victims. The people of the village were horrified and outraged. They had thought their land was cursed by the gods, but all along, it had been Kofi who had brought the evil upon them. The village elders decided that Kofi must be sacrificed to the gods, just as he had taken the lives of their children. Only then would the curse be lifted. On the night of the full moon, Kofi was led to the sacred grove where the villagers made their offerings. Bound and surrounded by the villagers, he was offered as a sacrifice to appease the gods and end the suffering he had caused. As the fire burned brightly and the drums echoed through the night, the people prayed that the darkness which had fallen over their village would finally be lifted. After Kofi's death, the disappearances stopped, and peace returned to the village. The people, once again, began to trust in the gods, believing that the curse had been broken. And although Abina had once been an outcast, she was now seen as a hero, for her courage had saved the village from a terrible fate. From that day forward, the villagers no longer shunned her but welcomed her into their hearts. She had exposed the true evil that had plagued their land, and in doing so, she restored peace to the village.